Imagine for a moment that you're trying to quit sugar. You know it's bad for you. You know it's messing with your health. But the moment you try to cut it out, your body starts craving it even more. You walk past a bakery and suddenly that one smell of fresh bread or chocolate cake is enough to send your willpower crashing. That's not weakness, it's chemistry. And the same thing happens when you're trying to move on from someone you once loved. Your brain is wired to associate that person with reward. And when the connection breaks, the craving doesn't just disappear. It intensifies. This is what I call the dopamine trap. Every time you thought of them, every time you laughed together, every intimate moment, your brain was reinforcing a reward loop. It was saying, this person equals pleasure, this person equals safety, this person equals love. So, when they're gone, your brain panics. It doesn't say, well, they weren't right for me anyway. It says, where's my fix? That's why so many people who know, logically, that the relationship was wrong for them, still find themselves reaching for the phone, scrolling through old pictures, or replaying conversations at 2 a.m. Your body is literally in withdrawal. Think about the last time you were tempted to text your ex. You probably didn't even miss them in that moment. What you were missing was the hit, the reassurance of hearing their voice, the comfort of a familiar routine, the little dopamine spike that made your loneliness feel bearable. And here's the cruel irony. Your brain doesn't differentiate between healthy love and unhealthy attachment. It only cares about the rush. That's why people go back to relationships that drained them, hurt them, or made them feel small. The chemical high outweighed the rational truth. Now, if you understand that, it starts to make sense why moving on feels so much harder than we think it should be. People beat themselves up all the time. Why can't I let this go? Why do I still think about them? But the truth is, you're not weak. You're not broken. You're simply human, and your brain is doing what it's programmed to do. The problem is, if you don't recognize the trap, you'll keep confusing craving with love. You'll think, I must still love them because I can't stop thinking about them. No, you're craving the chemical pattern your brain got used to, and that's a very different thing. When you see it that way, the power shifts. Instead of saying, I need them back to feel better, you can say, I need to rewire my brain so I don't mistake craving for connection. And how do you do that? You don't starve yourself and sit there in pain. Just like you wouldn't quit sugar by staring at cakes all day, you start replacing the old rewards with new ones. You build habits, you invest in new experiences, you surround yourself with people who bring you energy instead of draining it. The more your brain links reward to things beyond that old relationship, the weaker the craving becomes. This is why people who throw themselves into growth after a breakup tend to heal faster. It's not because they cared less. It's because they gave their brain new sources of dopamine, whether it was exercise, learning a skill, reconnecting with friends, or even just reclaiming their independence. Over time, the ex stops feeling like the only source of happiness. And when that happens, you stop chasing the illusion and start living again. So the next time you catch yourself craving your ex, remember, it's not love pulling you back. It's chemistry, and chemistry can be rewired. That awareness alone is the first step to breaking free from the trap that keeps so many people stuck in cycles they were never meant to repeat. One of the biggest lies we tell ourselves after a breakup is that we're missing the person. But if you dig a little deeper, most of the time, what you're actually missing isn't them, it's the story you built around them. Think about it. From the very beginning of a relationship, we start constructing a narrative. This is the person who will finally understand me. This is the person I'll build a future with. This is the person who makes me feel alive. And once that story is set in motion, every little moment you share becomes a piece of evidence to support it. When it ends, it's not just the person that disappears. It's the entire dream you were holding on to. That's why letting go feels so impossible. You're not just grieving them, you're grieving the fantasy of who they were to you. Your brain doesn't just replay memories, it edits them into a highlight reel. It remembers the date where you laughed until your stomach hurt, but not the week they ignored your messages. It remembers how they looked at you that one night, but not how they made you feel small when you needed their support. The story you're attached to is an upgraded, romanticized version of reality, and that's the story your brain clings to long after the relationship has expired. It's the same way we hold on to a holiday destination in our mind. When you think back to a trip, you don't remember the missed flights, the bad hotel room, or the rain. You remember the sunset, the laughter, the freedom. Your ex becomes that exotic place in your memory. You edit out the inconveniences, and all that's left is the fantasy. And fantasies are much harder to walk away from than people because they don't exist in reality. They exist in your imagination, which means they're perfect, untouchable, and immune to flaws. This is why so many people fall into the trap of trying again with an ex. They're not going back to the real person. They're chasing the fantasy. They're saying, if I can just have one more chance, maybe the story I told myself will finally come true. But the truth is the story wasn't real the first time, and it won't be real the second. When you see it clearly, you realize you were in love not only with them, but with the idea of who you thought they could be. That's a hard pill to swallow, because it means admitting you weren't just hurt by what they did. You were hurt by the gap between your fantasy and their reality. The dangerous part about this illusion is that it keeps you from moving forward. You can't open yourself to someone new if you're still in love with a character who doesn't exist outside your mind. You'll measure every new connection against that fantasy, and of course, no one can compete with perfection. The new person will be real, flawed, messy human. The fantasy will always win in comparison because it's been polished by your imagination. The shift comes when you have the courage to separate the fantasy from the truth. You ask yourself, what was real about this person and what was just the story I created? And when you answer honestly, you'll see the cracks. You'll remember the inconsistencies, the times they let you down, the reality that didn't match your dream. That doesn't mean the connection wasn't meaningful. It means it was human. And when you allow yourself to see it for what it was, not for what you wished it would be, the grip starts to loosen. So, when you catch yourself romanticizing your ex, stop and remind yourself, I'm not in love with them. I'm in love with the story. And once you recognize the difference, you can start writing a new story, one that isn't based on chasing someone who couldn't live up to the role you cast them in, but on finding someone who meets you in reality, not just in fantasy. One of the most overlooked reasons we struggle to let go of someone is our ego's obsession with closure. The relationship might be over, the connection might be broken, but the questions keep circling in your mind like an unfinished puzzle. Why did they stop loving me? What did I do wrong? Was I not enough? Do they ever think about me? These questions feel like they demand answers, and until we get them, we can't rest. It's almost as if the brain refuses to file the experience away in the past until it has tied every loose end neatly. But relationships rarely end with neatness. Most of the time, they end in mess, confusion, and silence, and that silence drives us crazy. Your mind wants certainty. It wants a clean explanation that will make the pain make sense. So when it doesn't get it, it replays the past over and over, looking for clues. You find yourself analyzing text messages, revisiting arguments, or remembering moments when things felt off. It's as if you've become your own detective, piecing together evidence for a case that has no resolution. The problem with this is that every time you revisit those memories, you reignite the emotional connection. Instead of healing, you're strengthening the bond, because the mind doesn't care whether the memory is happy or painful. It still keeps you tied to them. Closure feels like it's going to come from them. We tell ourselves, if they would just explain why, if they would just admit they messed up, if they would just tell me they still care, then I could finally move on. But think about how many times people actually get that kind of closure. Even if they do, most discover it doesn't bring the peace they hoped for. Why? Because closure doesn't come from someone else's explanation. It comes from your decision to stop looking backward. Waiting for someone else to give you closure is like handing them the keys to your freedom. You're essentially saying, I can't be happy until you give me permission. That keeps you stuck in their power long after they've walked away. The ego hates unanswered questions because unanswered questions feel like rejection. If you don't know why they left, your ego fills in the blanks. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe they found someone better. Maybe I'll never be loved again. But these are stories, not facts. And the danger is, the more you repeat them, the more your brain starts to believe them. Suddenly, you're not just grieving the relationship, you're grieving your own worth. That's why it hurts so deeply. It's not just about losing them. It's about what losing them makes you believe about yourself. Here's the truth: closure is rarely about the other person. It's about you deciding that their reasons, their silence, their inability to give you what you needed no longer matter. You don't need to know whether they loved you as much as you loved them. You don't need to know if they regret it. You don't need to know if they're happier without you. What you need is to reclaim the narrative and say, this ended because it wasn't right for me. That's enough. The moment you stop needing answers is the moment you begin to take back your power. The ego will resist because it wants justice, it wants fairness, it wants to win. But real freedom comes when you let go of the illusion that one more conversation, one more text, or one more explanation will finally set you free. It won't. The loop only breaks when you accept that closure isn't something you get from them. It's something you give yourself by deciding that the story is over. And once you do that, you finally stop living in the replay and start living in the present. ChatGPT said, one of the hardest truths to accept about love is that attachment doesn't just disappear when a relationship ends. We like to believe that once we've broken up, the emotional bond should dissolve as quickly as deleting their number from our phone. But human connection doesn't work that way. Bonds are not switches we can turn off. They're more like Velcro. Once two lives intertwine, the fibers cling to each other, and pulling them apart doesn't just happen cleanly. It tears, it leaves residue, and sometimes the pieces stay stuck long after the person is gone. Think back to the moments of deep intimacy in your relationship, the long conversations at night, the small routines you shared, the comfort of knowing there was someone to message when something happened in your day. Those rituals built an attachment system in your brain, and that system doesn't just shut down when the relationship ends. Even when you know it's over, the bond is still alive. That's why you can feel their absence like a physical ache. It's not weakness, it's biology. Humans are wired for attachment, and our brains resist losing it because it once meant survival. In the past, being attached to someone meant safety, protection, and belonging. So, when that bond breaks, your mind reacts as though you've lost a lifeline. This explains why you might feel triggered by the smallest things. A song on the radio, a cafe you used to visit together, even just hearing someone say their name. The bond pulls you back because your brain has associated so many aspects of your environment with them. You're not just trying to let go of a person, you're trying to rewire hundreds of tiny associations that remind you of that person. And until you actively create new associations, those reminders will keep reopening the wound. What most people do when they feel that attachment pull is fight it. They say, I shouldn't feel this way anymore. I should be over this by now. But that only creates more pain. Attachment doesn't care about timelines. Some bonds take months to fade, others take years. The real key isn't to force the bond to vanish, but to acknowledge it for what it is, a residue of love, not proof that the relationship should continue. The danger comes when people mistake the persistence of attachment for a sign they should go back. They think, if I still feel connected, it must mean we're meant to be. But no, that's just Velcro doing what Velcro does. It clings. That doesn't mean it belongs on you forever. Healing from attachment isn't passive. Time helps, yes, but time alone isn't enough. If you sit in the same routines, visit the same places, listen to the same playlists, you're feeding the old bond every single day. To weaken it, you have to actively create new patterns, meet new people, build new rituals, form new habits. When you build a life that has meaning and joy outside of that person, the Velcro begins to lose its hold. It doesn't mean the memories disappear. It means the bond no longer dictates your present. And there's something empowering in realizing that attachment is natural, but it isn't destiny. You don't have to hate your ex to move on. You don't have to erase every memory. You just have to stop fueling the bond with your energy and attention. Because every time you replay the past, you're strengthening the tie. Every time you invest in your future, you're loosening it. Eventually, the pull fades. The fibers come apart. And one day you wake up and realize you can think about them without feeling like you've lost a part of yourself. That's when you know the attachment has finally given way to freedom. One of the cruelest tricks your brain plays on you after a breakup is the way it edits the past. It doesn't hand you a balanced picture of what really happened. Instead, it serves you a highlight reel. You find yourself lying in bed remembering the time they surprised you with flowers, or the night you stayed up until sunrise talking about everything and nothing. You remember the way they looked at you across the table, the way you felt safe in their arms, the laughter that made the world feel lighter. But what your mind leaves out, conveniently, is the argument that followed the next day, the empty promises, the long silences when you needed them most. The brain is selective, and in heartbreak, it tends to romanticize. This selective memory happens because your brain is trying to protect you. It wants to soothe the pain of loss by reminding you of the best parts, as if to say, look what you once had. But instead of helping you heal, it makes you long for something that never existed in the way you're remembering it. You're not missing the whole relationship. You're missing a filtered version of it. It's like watching a movie trailer and forgetting that the full film wasn't nearly as beautiful as the highlights made it seem. The danger in this illusion is that it makes you believe you lost perfection. You start telling yourself, we were so good together, I'll never find that again. But if you strip away the editing, you'd see the flaws that actually made the relationship unsustainable. You'd remember the loneliness you felt even while you were together, the compromises that drained you, the effort you put in without getting the same in return. Those weren't small details. They were the reality. And ignoring them in favor of the highlight reel is like rewriting history to make it seem better than it was. That's why people get stuck in cycles with their ex. They replay the best moments and forget the reasons they broke up in the first place. The brain says, maybe we could get that magic back. But what it's chasing is a fantasy stitched together from selective memory. And here's the truth. You can't rebuild a relationship on a highlight reel. Because the reality, the full picture, is always waiting in the background. And if you go back, the same issues will surface again, not the fantasy version, but the real one you tried to escape. The first step to breaking free of this illusion is radical honesty. When your mind drifts to the best moments, don't stop yourself from remembering, but follow it up with the whole truth. Say to yourself, yes, we laughed that night, but the next morning I cried because they didn't show up for me. Pair every highlight with its counterpart, and you'll start to see the relationship for what it truly was, a mixture of highs and lows, not the flawless romance your memory is feeding you. And here's the most powerful part. When you accept the reality, you give yourself permission to grieve the truth instead of clinging to the fantasy. You can say, I miss the good times, but I don't miss the pain that came with them. That honesty weakens the illusion and helps you move forward, because you're no longer comparing your future to a fantasy that no one, not even your ex, could live up to. Over time, you'll find that the highlight reel loses its shine. The more you create new memories, the more you build joy in your present life, the less appealing those old edited clips feel. And one day, when your brain tries to replay the past, you'll see it clearly, not as the best thing you ever had, but as an experience that taught you something, shaped you, and ultimately freed you for something better. At some point, the cycle has to break. You can't spend the rest of your life trapped in withdrawal, clinging to a fantasy, replaying unanswered questions, and living off the highlight reel. If you do, you'll keep giving your past the power to control your present. And that's where the real shift happens, when you realize that healing isn't about waiting until you magically stop caring. It's about actively rewiring your focus, your identity, and your habits so that your life grows bigger than the shadow of your aches. Most people try to heal by doing nothing. They tell themselves, if I just wait long enough, one day I'll stop thinking about them. But time by itself doesn't heal. It only creates distance. And distance without growth still leaves you vulnerable, because the moment you feel lonely or nostalgic, you'll be pulled right back into the old bond. That's why so many people relapse into texting their ex months after a breakup. They haven't replaced the bond with something stronger. The real breakthrough comes when you stop asking, how do I stop missing them? And start asking, oh, what am I building in my life right now that excites me more than missing them? The answer might be a new skill, a new social circle, a new vision for your future. It might be reclaiming independence, rediscovering passions you neglected, or learning to feel complete on your own. The point is, you have to give your brain new sources of reward. If you don't, the craving will always win. This is where identity becomes crucial. When you're with someone, you unconsciously start to define yourself in relation to them. I'm their partner. I'm the person who shares this life. When that identity is stripped away, you feel like you've lost a piece of yourself. That's why you feel empty, not because you can't live without them, but because you haven't rebuilt who you are outside of them. The work after a breakup isn't just letting go of the past, it's reclaiming your sense of self. You ask, who am I when I'm not theirs? Who am I when I'm not defined by this relationship? And here's the empowering part. Once you start answering those questions, the obsession fades. You begin to see that your life isn't smaller without them. It's actually expanding. You realize that the energy you've been pouring into longing, questioning, or replaying could be redirected into becoming stronger, wiser, and more fulfilled. You stop being the person chasing crumbs of validation from the past, and you start being the person building something unshakable in the present. Of course, it takes discipline. You have to catch yourself when you slip into replay mode and redirect that energy. You have to resist the urge to check their social media or reopen the door. You have to build habits that support your growth, whether that's exercising, journaling, surrounding yourself with people who lift you, or simply structuring your day so you don't fall into old patterns. These aren't just distractions, they're the scaffolding for your new life. And little by little, the bond weakens. The dopamine trap loses its grip, the fantasy fades, the unanswered questions stop mattering, the Velcro starts to unstick, the highlight reel loses its shine, because now your brain has something new to attach to you. Your growth, your joy, your vision. That becomes the new source of reward. The truth is, breaking the cycle isn't about erasing your ex from memory. It's about outgrowing the version of yourself that needed them. When you do that, the past stops pulling you back because you've stepped into a future that feels too good to abandon. That's when you know you've finally let them go, not because the love meant nothing, but because your life means everything.